In this video, we're going to dive deep into some of the theories around coffee storage. Let's get straight into it. So you've gone to the supermarket and you've bought yourself some beans that have been saturated with nitrogen or other chemicals to ensure for long-lasting freshness. Now, without building myself a lawsuit, those beans get stored in the bin. Do not buy beans from the supermarket unless you need to season your new burrs in your grinder and you don't want to use coffee beans that will actually taste good. But even then, coating your new burrs with oily, low-quality flavors is not really setting you up for a good future of coffee. So now you've gone to your local specialty cafe or bean retailer and purchased a kilo of fresh beans. Now, when I say fresh, let's say within 1 week of roast date. And you're drinking 1 to 2 cups a day, which means you'll get about 50 cups, give or take, which at 2 cups a day will be roughly 3 weeks worth of coffee, including some wastage and dialing in your grinder. Now, depending on the roast, the best rule of thumb, in my opinion, is to keep your beans at an age of no more than 1 week for dark roasts, 2 weeks for medium roasts, and under 3 weeks for light roasts. Now, that difference is determined by the CO2 that these beans will be releasing after the roasting process. The darker the roast, the more rapid this happens due to the beans being more porous than the lighter roasts. So keep all of that in mind and, of course, experiment. Now, there are always other variables that come into play with coffee, like your storage temperatures, but we'll touch base on all of this in the final summary. So that was just a quick little guide. Don't stop watching yet because there's a lot more info to come. So you have your beans at the correct post-roast age, and now you're ready to store them. What you definitely do not want to do is just dump that bag in the freezer as it is, because opening that bag occasionally is going to introduce a whole bunch of chemical reactions to your beans. So a good option is to fill your hopper with enough coffee for a few days. Yes, they won't go anywhere, and it will actually help with consistency of dosing due to the anti-popcorn effect that it creates. Of course, if you're single dosing, then don't do that. Then separate your beans into 1 week portions and pop them into smaller bags, or just buy smaller bags of coffee. Make sure you remove as much oxygen as possible and pop them in the freezer. Preferably a freezer that you aren't storing food in, as that just makes me uncomfortable. If you have a few types of beans all at the same time and you want to be able to store them on your brew bar, this is completely fine. Keeping in mind, if your home temperature is around 20 degrees Celsius, it's going to be much better, as higher ambient temperatures will rapidly increase that degassing process, and ultimately your beans will just go stale quicker. Now, as for the container itself, just like this one, which is the fellow Atmos, has a great little function that tells you when you have hit that point of vacuum. So once you've put your beans into the fellow Atmos, you can create the vacuum. This guy's pretty cool how it works. We're not selling a product today. And then you can pop them aside. Now, quite often, people ask me, why has the green line disappeared? Is this faulty? And the short answer is no. What is actually happening is the CO2 being released by the beans is just equalize the pressure inside the container. And of course, replacing that vacuum will make it appear as though you've lost your vacuum. A good test is to simply just tug on the lid, and if it doesn't come off, then you know that no oxygen has been introduced to your beans. And it should do this. A great way to test if your vacuum container is faulty is to have no beans inside it, create the vacuum however your container does, put it aside, and just see how long it takes for the light or the vacuum to go away. Now, if you're being extremely particular or you just have some very high quality beans, just like I do at home and at the cafe, you can single dose your beans into labeled vacuum seal bags and pop them in the freezer, which will keep them fresh for a very long time, especially if you do have a freezer that will go down as low as -40. If not, your typical domestic freezer at -20 will suffice for long enough before you need to try that Panama Geisha that you've spent all your money on. If you're watching this video, you care about coffee, so don't buy ground coffee. I'm sorry, but I personally take coffee far too serious to accept that anyone can grind your coffee perfectly to allow for humidity changes, different machines, and a whole bunch of variables that will just prevent you from being able to make a great coffee. Now, yes, I do grind beans for customers if they need it, and most cafes and roasters will. None of us enjoy doing it, but personally, I make it very clear that the end result is not going to be what I would consider good quality coffee. And for storage, just leave it in the bag in a dark cupboard, but make sure that the safety valve is exposed. Or don't. I dare you. The gases being released after being ground will be so rapid that the bag will possibly explode. I've tested it. It works. You can make a bag explode. But if you want to try it, let me know. Now, there are still many variables and other questions to answer, but TikTok has created a very short attention span in the typical viewer, so I'm trying to keep it short. And of course, drop a comment if I haven't answered your question. But let's put it all together for you to visualize what works best for you and give you that perfect drinking, freezing window from my personal experience. So let's say you have some beans that are super fresh, 1 day post roast, and your home temperature is roughly 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit for those people, and you have a dark roast. You want to keep that no sooner than 1 day and no later than 7 days. For a medium roast, no sooner than 7 days, no later than 21 days. Now, I know that's a big window because there's just too many variables for me to squish that number down. For a light roast, no sooner than 10 days and no later than 14 days. So keeping in mind all of the CO2 being released by these beans is what's affecting those numbers. Now let's change just one variable, your home temperature. Let's say it's closer to 30 degrees Celsius or 86 degrees Fahrenheit. For a dark roast, no sooner than 1 day, no later than 5 days. For a medium roast, no sooner than 6 days, no later than 14 days. For a light roast, no sooner than 7 days, but no later than 10 days. Very, very small window there. So, the hotter the ambient temperature, the quicker that degassing phase happens, and essentially your beans going stale faster. So take all of this into account with your own experiments and see what works best for you. Now, there are still a lot of other variables to keep in mind, and this has all been based on specialty roasters here in Australia using similar logics for post-roast coffee treatment. Because things like quenching the beans out of the roaster to stop the roast process of large volumes of beans will change a lot of the above information. So make sure you ask a lot of questions when you're buying your beans. Because personally, I've watched people go crazy trying to figure out what's wrong with their machine or grinder or just their brewing method in general, when a major part of the issue could just be not knowing how to treat your beans. So even if it's just a small $15 bag of coffee, make sure you ask as many questions as you can. And secondly, if the beans have an expiry date, put them back on the shelf and leave. What you want to see is a roast date. Got it? Good. Well, that's all for now, but if you have any questions, make sure you pop them below and make sure you subscribe while you're here, because it's going to make it a lot easier for me to know if you actually care about this stuff. And then I can keep doing more of it and less of the motorbike stuff that people don't seem to be too happy about. Anyway, I know I haven't answered everything, but for now, thank you so much for watching. Have yourselves a great day and happy brewing.